What's interesting is that more often than not, I find that Christians don't listen or at least live by Christ's teachings as much as you suspect. In fact, most Christians live by Paul's teachings. And there's something in Christ's teachings that branch between all the major religions that we see in other traditions, that we see in other spiritualities, that speak to the heart of what it means to be alive and to be a human. Whereas often, quote unquote, Christians, evangelicals, etc., especially the way it's taught anyway, is that being part of Christianity makes you apart, sets you apart from everyone else. Whereas indeed Christ was pointing to a centeredness of spirit, how God is within each of us, no matter our religion. He wasn't just speaking to Christians of his time or the future. He was speaking to the reality that's been true for millennia and much longer. So today, let's just take a moment to begin to center on Christ's teachings about how divinity is within us. And as he said, he is the vine, we are the branches. This was Christ speaking from an awakened state, from knowing his true nature. He said it himself, I am the way, the truth, the life. This is how a lot of awakened teachers speak. We call them many things, sages, gods, demigods in history, and in certain religions, we call them many different things. But in fact, they teach that our natural state is exactly like them, and that was Christ's fundamental teaching. He wasn't saying these things to set such a high bar that we could never pass, that his death would get us to the place we need to be without transformation. No. He was sharing these things so that we would live by them. We would start to allow those words to center us in this place of divine unity. So let's take that moment using slow breathing. I like to use box breathing, method used by many people, but particularly special forces to calm their nerves, which is 4 seconds on each 4 parts of the breath. 4 seconds in, slow seconds, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, and 4 seconds hold with no breath. So if anything today, we can take away a very practical tool that you might have heard before, but this is your reminder to use it. I find myself in the camp of hearing many great things that I don't always use. And yet this one you can carry around in your pocket quite easily. It takes up no space, actually. And indeed, the 4 seconds box breathing method, or more seconds, or less if you find that tough, that method can create space, create room, shaking us from our pathological circuit thinking, our habitual anxiety breathing and thinking and behaving. It's an important tool to keep using every time you remember it, because it only takes a second to get back into it, at least for a breath or two. And the more you do it, the more you find yourself kind of gravitating to slower breathing. You'll notice, hey, I'm not so anxious today. I wonder why. Weirdly, something so simple. And yet throughout sacred texts, they talk a lot about breath. They talk a lot about returning to earth and our connectedness with earth. Even the word Adam was a derivation of the word for earth, most probably. And we see that in many texts where the human, including the word human, derived from something meaning earth. So it's good to remember that it's not us reaching outward further and further, grasping to obtain some higher enlightenment, some higher state of human being. But in fact, it's in a way a letting go of grasping, letting go of neediness, letting go of false sense of self and separation. Because if you remember that story from Christ, or maybe it's new to you, Christ had a lot of stories that were very in-depth and inspirational and aren't always used for those purposes to inspire people to live their natural life. But in that story, in that depiction of the vine, saying he is the vine and we are the branches, he said, but if you reach too far, if you go too far out from the vine, you have to be thrown into the fire. You break off. What happens to a branch if it breaks off the vine? It shrivels and dies. It gets thrown into a fire. And I don't believe that this is a threat of eternal hell. No, I think it's actually something we've all experienced to some degree. Every time we start reaching too far out with our selfishness, thinking we're so separate from our source, from our actual light of consciousness, that we are this person we've concocted over time. We have all these ideas about what it means to be that person or a person in general. We live so much in our heads about this false sense of self, always feeding it, always centering on it. It's not real. It's an idea that's changing in itself, always changing. Get so defensive about it. We want so much for it. We fight our whole lives to feed it. Some people call it ego. That parts of it can get so far out there, it feels like we truly are so separate from life, from other people. And guess what happens when we're out there eventually? We get burned. I don't know if you've ever experienced this. You get burned. You're out there, you're ego land, and it can't help but get burned. It's natural. It's like a dried up branch close to a fire, out in the sunlight. I was hearing about mulch spontaneously combusting. It's really sad in some instances. Crazy. But that's what happens when branches are so dry, and in this case with mulch, left to kind of simmer in itself, creates a reaction with the oxygen. It's natural. It's natural. It's not God trying to kick us in the head to just punish us. Oh, you didn't get my name right. I was here 2,000 years ago. You know, it's like, what? That's ridiculous. Jesus wouldn't even have called himself Jesus in that pronunciation. So let's just get over ourselves. Get over the sense of person, that separate sense that we project onto Christ. Because Christ 2,000 years ago was saying, I don't think of myself the way you think about people. I just don't. I'm not that. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. See, it becomes a lot clearer when we really look at his words and see that, oh, he talked a lot like the Buddha, or Padmasambhava, who the Tibetans believe, some Tibetan Buddhists, many Tibetan Buddhists believe to be the second Buddha. His writings are pretty amazing as well. Padma Sambhava. I think it's one word. If I could spell it out for you, I would. You can try for me. And so it's amazing. We have this history of these enlightened beings, not just one, teaching us the same kinds of things. And they weren't teaching us so that we think it was impossible. They were teaching us to teach us. In fact, Christ said it multiple times in the Christian gospel. Why say Lord, Lord, quote, quote, and not do what I've told you to do, I've asked you to do? Why are you spouting that you're a Christian and not doing my teachings? And it turns out a lot of what we center on in religion tends to be the distortions that people in power, the beings in power, want us to focus on. It's this manipulation of tradition over time, not just Christianity. Islam happens with Buddhism, happens with Hinduism, happens with scientism. Science does. We tend to think we're scientific if we just totally dismiss things that seem paranormal. That's not scientific at all. Paranormal is a label. That's our idea of what's impossible, not scientific. So we can get into these grooves in every single mode of thinking, honestly. Even the sense that you are a person is an idea, it's a belief. I am this body, what? Where does you end? Where do I end? And something else begin? You can't really cut a person out of the universe. They won't exist. They won't exist in the past, they won't exist in the future, they won't exist the moment it happens. So we're actually one. One light. In fact, it's all energy. One light. No matter how dark we seem to become, the body is made of light. No matter how mean, how cruel. And in fact, people learn from those of us who behave that way. It's not the healthiest. It's not. It's not the best feeling to be a narcissist, but narcissists are feeding what they think they like. I can relate. We all have our moments. It comes from a false sense of self, a need to defend ourselves, a sense of separation, ultimately, fear of death. Can come from trauma and chemistry, brain damage even. We know this to be the case, unfortunately. And yet, fortunately, these things are used like foils, like the sand in a, not a clam, is it? Is it a clam? Sand that's used to make a pearl. I guess it is. So those moments of feeling separate can be foils for us internally as well. Where we start to see, oh, there's a projection of who I am in my head that I call me. I say, that's me. It's even a feeling. It has feelings involved. It has a sense of shape. And yet the Lord, in many traditions, the Lady, the Divine One, the awakened spirit of all life, teaches us, no, our fundamental state is more subtle. That's seen. That's here. What's seeing can't be seen so easily anyway. It can only be experienced. It can only just be, honestly. So we're tasked with the easiest job in creation, and that's to relax a little bit. about whatever it is, I swear, that's your job. To notice that things change, your feelings change. You might be obsessing about something really dire. I don't know what it is, obviously. Lawsuit, trauma, loss. Some real stuff happens, so to speak. But it's all happening in the reality of consciousness, in the reality of light. You know, there's scientists who believe we live in a projection, a hologram, and they have good evidence for it. We should actually take them more seriously. It's like the Buddhists say in some scriptures, behave as though you live in a dream. Now, I don't know where some people might take that quote, maybe too far, like anything. But really, we should see that everything's changing, and it's all actually a manifestation of what sees it. How can we see these things? How can we smell? How can we hear, perceive, or other things perceive? Maybe even other spectrums of light and what so have you. Spirit. Some people say they see spirit. Some people have had NDEs, seeing amazing things, coming back with deep wisdom. But all these things arise where? You can say here, but even this is an idea arising, a picture arising, an X-ray scan being created and looked at in consciousness. In consciousness. Can't escape it. It's impossible. Even at night, in deep sleep. We know little about that state because we can't remember it. Memory is not functional. But as I said in our last video, you can't create an experiment that isn't created and observed and analyzed at some point in consciousness. It's impossible. And in fact, in quantum physics, we know that reality has this kind of nebulous state when consciousness isn't interacting with it. It's almost like the focal point of consciousness. It's like a focus within the great consciousness that is the universe. In a way, all things are this energetic consciousness. In fact, there's good evidence that consciousness is energy, rises as energy. What's the difference between the first cells and the bottom of the ocean? In certain instances. And what gets them from there to us? What's the difference between them and, a couple steps higher? These are questions we can ask ourselves, but there are really kind of inspiring answers that all have to center on energetic disturbance, energetic awareness, energetic fields, so that we know what's going on, however small or big we are. And so we are one in this universe of light, of energy, of creation. And so today we're tasked with just remembering that all our boundaries are porous, in that sense. That our projection of self is just that, a projection, an idea. That the one that seems attacked and fearful is not the one seeing it exactly. I mean, it's all one, but that's not really us. The core of what we are is divine, is Christ, is Buddhahood, is Krishna, is Kali. So let's take another moment to turn to our box breathing. And this time I'll count with you if you'll let me. starting with in-breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Out 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold out 1, 2, 3, 4. In 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's try to keep the rhythm of that breathing. Just for a moment, let yourself do whatever, as you probably are already. Just holding aspects of that rhythm to see how we might take this into our everyday living. A lot of times we take a deep breath and it's a quick deep breath, which isn't, always uncalled for. It can be helpful. But that slower breath kind of disconnects the rhythmic breathing from our heartbeat a little bit more, from our thinking. Allows our heart to kind of change its shape with its beat, supposedly. Definitely helps our brain find more of a sense of freedom, even if part of that is like, how do I keep this breath going like that? And there can often be a part of us that just fights all the time. Fights living, fights circumstances, it's uncomfortable. So as we do our breathing and as we let go of our stark sense of being separate from the vine, let's hold that being with some compassion, a little love, some patience. Not applying shame or guilt to that idea we have of ourselves that's mired in reactivity. Or even just a fundamental reaction from something. Let's hold that with compassion. Noticing guilt and shame as it arises with some of our habits throughout the day. Just hands off the shame. We're so hard on ourselves. We don't deserve it. Even if you think you deserve whatever. Hands off the shame, the guilt. Hands off the neediness for that thing might come with it. Hands off the sense of separation. Just let these things come and go. Not accusing ourselves of failing. And come to see that Christ speaks to each of us. That God speaks to each of us. That life speaks to each of us. That nature speaks to each of us. So many ways. It's not worth fighting about. Instruction can be helpful. It's not worth really arguing. It's not worth our peace. It's not worth others' peace. Well, thanks for joining me today, and I hope you subscribe, especially if you made it this far in this video. Let's connect again soon and go forward knowing that you are loved and that you are loved.